A little girl with cancer had one wish: to meet a Swiss guard. After 12 years of unwavering service, no one expected Lukas Meyer to break Vatican protocol. But when he did, what followed left the entire crowd in tears. Here's what happened. But before we continue, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow, at the same time, we'll bring you another story of courage and discipline from the papal guards that you won't want to miss. The Sunday morning sun cast gentle warmth across St. Peter's Square, its rays catching the Renaissance colors of Guard Lukas Meyer's ceremonial uniform. After 12 years protecting the Vatican, including extensive training in Rome's security protocols, Meyer had mastered the art of motionless vigilance while remaining acutely aware of his surroundings. Every whispered prayer, every shuffling footstep, every subtle shift in the pilgrim crowd's energy, none of it escaped his notice. It was this heightened awareness that first drew his attention to the small American family making their way through the gathering tourists. The mother and father moved with the careful attention of parents guarding something precious, while between them walked a little girl who couldn't have been more than 7. Her face, though pale and drawn, carried an expression of pure wonder as she took in the magnificent sight of St. Peter's Basilica. What caught Meyer's eye wasn't just her evident excitement. It was the colorful knit beanie pulled snugly over her clearly bald head, the way her parents supported her seemingly fragile frame, and the determined brightness in her eyes that spoke of a spirit far stronger than her physical condition suggested. "Mommy, look!" Her voice carried across the square, bright despite its weakness. "He's so tall, and his uniform has so many colors." Her enthusiasm drew gentle smiles from nearby pilgrims, though Meyer noticed how those smiles often melted into looks of quiet concern as they took in her appearance. A young mother nearby bent down to answer her own daughter's whispered question. "Sweetie, sometimes people get very sick," she explained softly, her voice carrying to Meyer's trained ears. "That's why we should be extra kind." "Stage 4, Meyer heard another tourist murmur to his companion. "Poor thing," the father was saying. "She wanted to see the Swiss guard before—" The rest of the sentence disappeared into a sympathetic shake of the head. Through it all, the little girl's eyes remained fixed on Meyer's post, her expression full of the kind of pure excitement that no illness could dim. Her parents exchanged a look over her head. A look Meyer had seen before in military hospitals, a look that spoke of love, fear, and the desperate desire to protect someone they knew they couldn't save. "Not too close now, Emily," her father cautioned gently as they drew nearer. "Remember what we talked about. The guards have very important duties." But Meyer could hear the catch in the man's voice, could see the way his hand tightened protectively around his daughter's smaller one. Emily nodded solemnly, though her eyes sparkled with barely contained joy. "I know, Daddy. They protect the Pope and the Vatican and hundreds of years of tradition." She pronounced the last word carefully, as if reciting a lesson she'd studied specifically for this moment. Despite her evident weakness, Emily's enthusiasm seemed to give her strength as she moved closer to Meyer's post. Her steps were small, but determined, each one accompanied by the supportive hands of her parents. The morning crowd parted naturally around them, creating a small pocket of space that seemed to acknowledge the special nature of this particular visit. "She's been talking about this for weeks," her mother was explaining quietly to an elderly Italian woman who'd asked about Emily's condition. "The doctor said," her voice dropped even lower, though Meyer's trained ears caught every word. "They said we should do it soon, while she still has the strength. It's her biggest wish." The elderly woman dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. "Dio la benedica," she whispered, watching as Emily's face lit up at the sight of Meyer's feathered beret. "Such a brave little thing." Other pilgrims had begun to notice the family as well. A group of Japanese visitors lowered their cameras respectfully. A tall American businessman in a suit quickly wiped his eyes before pulling out his phone to show his wife pictures of his own daughters back home. Parents throughout the crowd were drawing their children close, some explaining in hushed tones about the importance of being kind to others, while others simply watched with quiet sympathy. "Look at his halberd, Daddy." Emily's voice carried clearly across the courtyard, full of genuine admiration. "Do you think he got it for being brave?" Her own courage in the face of her condition made the question particularly poignant. Her father's voice was steady, though his eyes betrayed his emotion. "I'm sure he did, sweetheart. Just like you're brave every day at the hospital." He squeezed her thin shoulder gently. "Remember what Dr. Thompson said about your special medal?" Emily nodded proudly. "He said I'm the bravest patient he's ever had." She touched the small pin on her jacket, clearly a token from her medical team. With the same reverence, Meyer's fellow guards showed their ceremonial insignia. The morning sun had climbed higher now, warming the stones of the square. Meyer maintained his ceremonial stillness, but his awareness was focused entirely on the small family making their way closer to his post. In his 12 years of Vatican service, he'd stood guard through every kind of weather, faced every type of pilgrim and tourist, and maintained his composure through countless attempts to break his concentration. A tour guide's voice drifted over, strictly forbidden to interact. A security camera adjusted its angle. A young priest paused mid-stride, sensing the building tension. But something about Emily's innocent excitement and obvious struggle touched a part of him that all his military training hadn't quite managed to shield. As the family drew near, Meyer could hear more of their quiet conversation. Emily's voice, though weakened by her condition, carried enthusiasm that seemed to lift everyone's spirits around her. "Mommy, did you know the guards have to stand still for hours and hours? That's even longer than when I have to stay still for my treatments." Her mother's reply was gentle, tinged with both pride and heartache. "That's right, sweetheart. And you're just as brave as they are." She adjusted Emily's beanie with tender care, making sure it sat comfortably on her daughter's head. A young boy nearby tugged at his father's sleeve. "Papa, why doesn't she have any hair?" The question, asked with childlike innocence, carried clearly in the morning air. "Sometimes," the father replied softly, kneeling beside his son, "the bravest warriors fight battles we can't see. That's why we need to be extra kind and respectful." The boy nodded solemnly, then gave Emily a shy wave, which she returned with a bright smile. An older couple had stopped to speak with Emily's parents, their voices low but clear to Meyer's trained ears. "Our grandson went through the same thing last year," the woman was saying, her eyes misting over. "The strength these children show, it's remarkable." "The doctors gave us 3 months," Emily's father replied, his voice barely a whisper as Emily admired the basilica's architecture. "But she's fighting so hard. All she wanted was to see the Swiss Guard. She's watched every video, read every book." Meyer felt something tighten in his chest, a sensation he hadn't experienced since his early training days when the weight of Vatican responsibility first settled on his shoulders. Through his perfectly maintained forward gaze, he could see Emily's reflection in the basilica windows, her face glowing with excitement, despite her obvious physical fragility. "Look how straight he stands, Daddy," Emily exclaimed, edging slightly closer, but still maintaining a respectful distance. "Just like how Nurse Jenny tells me to sit up straight during my medicine time." Her comparison between his ceremonial bearing and her own daily battles struck a chord that resonated through Meyer's rigid posture. Above them, movement caught several pilgrims' attention. Pope Francis had appeared at his apartment window for the traditional Sunday Angelus blessing. His white cassock was visible against the papal apartments. Emily's eyes widened as she spotted him. "Daddy, the Pope! He's right there!" Her voice carried pure joy. The crowd's energy shifted subtly. A German tourist adjusted his glasses nervously. An elderly Polish woman crossed herself as the Japanese visitors bowed slightly. The American businessman fumbled with his phone, unsure of the appropriate response. The crowd around them had grown quieter. Parents lifted smaller children for a better view, not of the Swiss Guard this time, but of the brave little girl. A French mother whispered something about courage to her son. An Italian grandmother dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief as two African nuns exchanged concerned glances nearby. The usual background chatter of tourists softened to respectful murmurs. Emily had moved closer now, her steps small but determined. "Mommy, Daddy, may I please take a picture with him?" she asked, her voice carrying that particular mix of hope and politeness that only children can truly master. "I promise I won't get too close or break any Vatican rules." Her mother glanced at her watch with barely concealed anxiety, the kind of gesture Meyer had seen too many times in hospital waiting rooms. Of course, sweetheart. But remember what the doctor said about not tiring yourself too much. As Emily's father prepared to take the photo, she smoothed her pink dress, clearly saved for this special occasion, and adjusted her beanie with careful fingers. Meyer could see her reflection in the basilica windows, the way she tried to stand as straight as possible, despite the obvious effort it cost her. Just like a real guard, she whispered to herself, attempting to mimic his posture. The effort caused her to sway slightly, her father's hand instantly reaching out to steady her. Something shifted in Meyer's chest then, a feeling he'd last experienced during his Vatican training when decisions between protocol and humanity had been discussed in their ethics courses. Through his ceremonial stillness, he could feel the weight of every regulation, every rule, every tradition that made the Swiss Guard what it was. But he could also feel something else, something that spoke of a deeper duty, a more fundamental calling that had drawn him to papal service in the first place. The duty to protect, to serve, to recognize true courage when he saw it. Emily had positioned herself carefully at what she deemed a respectful distance, her smile bright despite the paleness of her face. "Daddy, do I look soldier straight?" she asked, trying to hold herself as still as possible, though her small frame trembled with the effort. Meyer could hear her breathing, slightly labored but determined. In his years of Vatican service, he'd seen countless pilgrims pose for photos, but never had such a simple act carried such weight. Through his peripheral vision, he caught sight of her parents' expressions, that unique mixture of pride, love, and barely contained heartbreak that only parents of critically ill children seemed to master. The crowd had grown completely silent now. Even the usual distant sounds of Roman traffic seemed muted. The morning sun caught the brass details of Meyer's uniform, casting small circles of light across Emily's face. A gendarmeria officer shifted his weight, watching the protocol breach unfold. A Monsignor in the crowd frowned, then softened as he watched Emily's expression. Above them, Pope Francis remained at his window, motionless. In that moment, Swiss Guard Lukas Meyer did something he hadn't done in long years of Vatican service. He moved. The movement was deliberate, precise, every bit as measured as his ceremonial stillness had been. A collective gasp rose from the crowd as he turned, and his boots pivoting with military precision to face Emily directly. Her eyes widened with surprise and wonder, her small hand instinctively reaching for her father's. But Meyer wasn't finished. With the same precision he'd learned in papal guard training, he lowered himself to one knee, bringing himself to eye level with the brave little girl who had touched something deep within his guardian's heart. "Hello, Emily," he said, his voice carrying the kind of gentle authority that only years of Vatican service can create. "I couldn't help but notice how perfectly you've been standing at attention." Emily's face lit up with a joy that seemed to push back the shadows of her illness, if only for a moment. You can talk," she whispered in amazement, then quickly added with endearing formality, "Sir?" Meyer's white-gloved hand moved to his ceremonial sash, unpinning one of his service medals. "This is for courage," he said simply, his voice quiet but clear. "Real courage." He held it toward her. "Like yours." Emily's mother covered her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Her father's camera shook as he tried to capture the moment. A Swiss tourist nearby removed his glasses to wipe them. An American teenager slowly lowered her phone. A Brazilian woman fingered her rosary beads as the moment unfolded before them. "May I?" Meyer asked. Emily nodded. He carefully pinned the medal to her pink dress. "There, now you're one of us." Emily touched the medal with shaking fingers. "But don't you need it?" she asked. Meyer smiled. "I think you've earned it more than I have." He stayed on one knee. "Want to learn the guard salute?" Meyer guided Emily's small hand through the motion. She concentrated hard despite her fatigue. When she managed a perfect salute, applause broke out. "Good," Meyer said. Then he opened his arms. "Hug?" Emily stepped into his arms, her small arms wrapped around his uniform. In that moment, he wasn't just a guard and she wasn't just a sick child. They were two people recognizing each other's strength. Above them, Pope Francis observed the scene from his window, then stepped back from view. Several pilgrims noticed his presence and began to pray quietly. Others simply watched, uncertain what protocol demanded in such a moment. When they parted, Emily's eyes were bright. Meyer stood and gave her a formal salute, the real kind, not for photos. "Thank you," Emily's mother said quietly. "You have no idea what this means." "Thank you, sir," her father added. "This is more than we hoped for." Meyer gave them a small nod of understanding. Some moments needed no words. He turned back to Emily, who was still beaming, despite the obvious fatigue beginning to show on her pale face. "Stand tall," he said, his voice carrying both military authority and personal warmth. "That's what makes you one of us now." "Yes, sir," Emily replied, straightening despite her tiredness, her small hand rising in one final salute. With the same precision that had marked his every movement, Meyer returned to his post. His boots clicked together, his halberd settled back into position, and his eyes fixed forward with ceremonial sharpness. But now there was something different, something that every witness to the scene could sense. The guard stood not just as a symbol of Vatican tradition and papal protection, but as a reminder that sometimes the greatest strength lies in knowing when to break protocol for the sake of humanity. As Emily and her parents made their way back through the crowd, pilgrims parted respectfully. A Spanish woman touched her shoulder and said, "Valiente." An Irish priest nodded solemnly. The Japanese tourists bowed again. The American businessman quickly showed his wife the video he'd captured, both wiping their eyes. The metal gleamed on her pink dress, catching the Roman sun. Above them, the papal window stood empty now. The world keeps turning, papal duties continue, and the Swiss Guard stands watch. But for one moment, on this ordinary Sunday morning, something extraordinary happened at St. Peter's Square. A guardian of Vatican tradition and a young warrior fighting her own battle reminded everyone present that while protocol serves a purpose, it's the heart that truly guides us in our finest moments. What would you have done in Guard Meyer's position? When is it right to break with tradition for the sake of compassion? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video if it touched your heart, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories about the Swiss Guards who stand as living symbols of both strength and humanity. Hit the bell icon to ensure you never miss our future uploads, and check out our other videos appearing on your screen right now. Until next time, remember that sometimes the greatest acts of duty come from listening to your heart.